So I'm Dennis Solensky. I'm the transit administrator at the DOT here for Connecticut. Like Art, I've been involved in public transit my whole adult life. I started managing a very small, actually startup transit system in Ohio, rural system for a few years. I went on to a larger urban system at Kent, Ohio. I spent 6 years there. I took over as the GM in Erie, Pennsylvania. I was there for 14 years. Was out on the West Coast for a little while in Washington State as the GM of a system there, and then I find myself here in Connecticut. Connecticut's public transit as a state is a little different than most of the rest of the states in the country, and as I've moved around a little bit, as I've said, I can verify that. Here in Connecticut, about 75% of the state's public transit is operated directly by us at the DOT through private contractors. The other 25% is operated by transit districts, which are very similar to transit authorities in the rest of the country. But for most of those transit districts, we subsidize at near or above 95% of their operating costs. So here in the state, we pretty much have direct input into how transit runs statewide. Provide most of the funding from an operating perspective, almost all the funding from an operating perspective, and are engaged in all of the capital projects as well. So I think I've been with the DOT for about 2.5 years. I'm blessed to work for a couple of guys who are tremendously aggressive in terms of technology, and I think we're on the cutting edge in terms of our business. I've been part of panels nationally to talk about electrification, some of the other things I'm going to talk about, and I can tell you that we're very forward thinking here at the DOT. I believe, obviously I'm biased, but I believe we're the most progressive division within the DOT between all of them. And we're moving forward rapidly in all phases of technology. I appreciate you showing the videos, scaring the heck out of them with people getting run over every 30 seconds before I start talking about our autonomous stuff. I promise you we won't allow that to happen. That's not exactly the segue I'm looking for. But we're being very aggressive in all aspects of technology. And since I've been in the industry, again, my whole adult life, I can tell you only recently has technology rapidly moved forward. For years, our industry operated largely under the same model, okay? And the model before was based on the cost of the driver. The cost of the driver of the vehicle from an operating perspective was anywhere between 80 and 90% of the cost of operating the entire route. And so because that was where the lion's share of the cost lied, we ran routes that used the largest vehicle possible, went as far as they could through the community, and folks were asked to come to the bus in order to get on it. And like Art said in his presentation, for a lot of our career, there was always a competition between us and the automobile, where in our business we almost viewed the automobile as our competition. Our job was to get folks out of cars and onto public transit. And so that was the dynamic for a long, long time. The buses changed some over time, right? Both the bus manufacturers would tell you, oh, we've got a great new bus, it's tremendously different. They didn't change that rapidly over the course of my career. There was improvements, of course, but you didn't see massive, rapid change in the technologies on the vehicle. We learned to count passengers technologically. We learned to do a few other things. Maybe some of the efficiencies and emissions were improved during diesel years. But other than that, the model stayed relatively the same, right? On the paratransit side, little buses that pick people up, the model stayed similar, and there were some drawbacks to it, right? You had to call 2 weeks in advance to book a trip. There were long times in advance you couldn't book the trip unless you called and gave plenty of time for a scheduler to sit there and create the schedule manually. There needed to be plenty of time for you to book the trip in order for that to occur. There were long wait times, right? If you waited at your house for a period of times for the vehicle to show up, Once you were dropped off, you would have to, you get done with your appointment. There's a long period of time often before the vehicle could come back and get you because it was out doing other things. And it was largely inefficient. Our paratransit service over the years picked up 1 to 1.5 passengers per hour, which was similar to taxi service, admittedly. No matter how hard we tried, no matter how hard we worked at it, there were constraints. There was necessary service, serving mostly elderly and individuals with disabilities, very important. It's tough to keep the costs down and tough to keep the services reliable and efficient because of the constraints that we had in scheduling and with the equipment that we utilized. But we worked hard at it for years, and now, you know, and lastly, with the fixed route service, the routes traveled long passes. You had to wait at the bus stop for years, right? Before technology, you would stand on the corner and look down the road. And I remember in high school going, is that the ice cream truck coming and freezing half to death in Cleveland, Ohio? Is that the UPS truck coming? God, I hope it's the bus. And no real way to know where the bus was in its route. So these were things that, you know, people regularly use public transit, but prohibited us from competing with the automobile because you knew where your automobile was. You knew how long it took you to get to it. You knew how long it took to get from point A to point B, and you could control a lot of that. So while public transit for a lot of years in our country worked extremely well in dense cities with high parking costs and maybe cities that were geographically bound by lakes or rivers or whatever, and we struggled to compete throughout my career in less densely populated areas. And so, fortunately for us, here in the latter stages, in the last 5 to 7 years, most of these shortcomings have been alleviated. We now have computerized scheduling software that talks to one another. We now have cell phones that you can book the trip on. We now have apps. I had one of the first apps in Erie that had GPS on it that actually tracked the buses, where you could go on the bus, go on for the first time and see the bus moving on your phone and know when it was going to pick you up. These were massive changes technologically to what we do as an industry. And so now our challenge, in my opinion, from an industry perspective, is how to put these things to use. We've done everything the same way for a long, long time. As Art mentioned, we have projects going on all over the country where people are anxiously and excitedly piloting these different technologies and trying to figure out how we're going to assimilate them and use them to improve the model and improve the model and improve the model. And of course, with the diligence that my boss, and his boss have worked, the commissioner, the bureau chief, and myself have all worked in the industry throughout for our entirety of our careers. We couldn't be more excited about this, and we couldn't be more excited about delivering these things to here in Connecticut. And here's some of the things that we're doing. The systems allow us to book on demand, right? They allow us to use your cell phone to schedule and take payment, as has been said by the other folks. They allow us to use smaller vehicles. We're blessed here in the state to have a tremendous number of private providers that have nice vehicles, small vehicles, and have wheelchair-equipped vehicles. And you rarely have that in a lot of other places in the country. We have the ability to integrate with these service providers because we have phenomenal technology now that talks to their technology. So the challenge that we have is how do we get these taxi providers and these TNC providers that are already located here and have large fleets of vehicles that have wheelchair accessibility, how do we integrate them with our service? Because to date, our paratransit services have operated in isolation and only serve their passengers, and we have these TNCs and these other providers out there operating their services. So now our challenge, and we have several pilots going on to this effect now, is to integrate these services together, to work closely together, to reduce the costs and provide more service to everybody in the state. And to that end, we have microtransit projects similar to that going in many of the cities. Now, just over the last year, we started one at Estuary Transit District that's modeling taking folks to and from the train station, getting folks off the train and taking them out into the community on an on-demand service. We have one starting at the Southeastern Transit District. It's actually going to take a low performance fixed route off the road and replace it with a small vehicle to test whether the microtransit option will work for services that are lower performing. Obviously, all of our routes don't perform at the same level. We have routes that perform tremendously well that are packed with people that are in the more densely populated areas. We have routes in the more suburban and rural areas that are less heavily populated but still cost the same to operate. So this microtransit proposition is allowing us to test the lesser performing routes, replacing them with on-demand service similar to Uber and Lyft, and improve our ridership accordingly. I mean, as Art mentioned, ridership is growing nationally. We're thrilled of that. I can tell you for the last several years it's been growing in Connecticut, even bucking the trend for a while. And a lot of it's through all of these advancements that we're in the process of doing. So as I mentioned, we're using the microservice to integrate taxi, Uber, and Lyft into our paratransit services. I mentioned Seat, I mentioned Estuary. We also have a project in Norwalk where we're using microtransit in the downtown as a tourism pilot. So each one of these that we funded it for a specific purpose. One is to serve a train station. We have many train stations in the state. We're modeling that. One is to replace a poorly performing route. We have other routes in the state we'd like to look at, and we're doing it with the intent of replacing other lesser performing routes. We have one in the downtown of Norwalk. If you've been to Norwalk, I'm sure small state many of you have. They have a real nice visitor and tourism type business in the downtown, restaurants, train station right there. So we're using it to model how to serve the urban areas of these small towns, smaller cities, and use them to reduce congestion and get people around in those areas. And then, as I mentioned, the coordination of human services here in the state is an area we can make tremendous progress in. You know, I told you at the start of my career, that's kind of my first job in this business, and I will not tell you how long ago, but some of you weren't around when that was going on, was to coordinate human service agencies. My first job in Ohio was to take all the local human service agencies, pool all their vehicles, write their first public transit grant, because they saw each other going back and forth down the street and realized they were going in and out of the same places and running their own fleets of vehicles to do that. And we know that at a higher level, this new technology and this new paradigm in our business will allow us to do this at a statewide basis here. So we are reaching out to all of our human service agency partners and starting to talk as much as we can about improving coordination here and following the national trend in that regard. And we are in the process of hiring some folks to do that. Have a new assistant with us here today who's a planner one now, I think, right? Priscilla was hired last week. We're bringing on several new folks to help us spear these projects along. We've been blessed. For the first time in a long time, we've had 4 or 5 additional positions approved, and they've been targeted for, at my request, working these projects forward, autonomous microtransit coordination efforts with the human service agencies, things like that. We have Rick Hanley with us today. Rick is our our technology guru down at the Public Transit Division, the DOT. Rick's working very hard on electrification. I'll talk to you of the fleet. I'll talk to you just real briefly about that in just a minute. So there's a major paradigm shift going on in our industry and a major paradigm shift going on here in Connecticut. It is definitely a change initiative, and the model has dramatically changed in what our ability is. And so we're spearheading that. I have a group that I call the CEO Roundtable. It is all of the executives of all the transit providers in the state, and we meet regularly, and we have committees set up that are taking these projects forward and learning to work with these various opportunities that we have available. I'm trying to give you the Chris Berman fastest 2 minutes in Connecticut transit here, so bear with me. In addition to that, I was fortunate enough 2.5 years ago to inherit the CT Fast Track. It's the nicest thing I've ever gotten in my career that I didn't have to literally die for. The first really outstanding thing I've been able to inherit in a long career. The CT Fast Track is 9.4 miles. For what you know, you may or may not know of it. The CT Fast Track is a fixed guideway bus rapid transit system. It's 9.4 miles long. It runs into downtown and terminates right near the train station. And what's unique about it to the rest of the country is that because we own it as a DOT as opposed to as a transit authority, we own the whole line, we own all the vehicles on it, we own all of the signalization on it, and we own all the crossroads on it, which is very, very unique nationally. So it makes a perfect demonstration asset for autonomous, right? As companies want to introduce autonomous into controlled areas. So we don't have situations like the one that Eric presented a few minutes ago. It's best to be able to do it, especially as they talk to you a little bit about the levels of autonomous. As we start introducing the lower levels and grow the levels of autonomous, it's best to be able to do that in a controlled environment, right? There is, unless someone is crossing the guideway, which happens periodically, which they shouldn't be doing, there is no other traffic on the guideway other than traffic we allow. The law enforcement uses it, of course, but other than that, all of the vehicles on it are either ours or at our permission. So as an asset, and as I've been heavily engaged in pursuing autonomous funding with Eric and all the other partners in our region, and Jackie as well. Prior to her current capacity, she was in Stamford, and we got to know each other well there as we were pursuing autonomous options for Stamford, which I still think is probably the #1 project in the state, but I don't have enough time to go into that. So the guideway is unique, and we recently, as Eric mentioned, applied to the Federal Transit Administration for funding in a partnership with New Flyer Corporation. I'm sure Art would tell you New Flyer is one of the largest bus manufacturers in the United States, and in my mind, one of, if not the most progressive in terms of adopting technology. And so we have a exclusive partnership with them in this grant application, asking for money for autonomous vehicles for the guideway to be, and our goal is to make the guideway, the fast track, the premier testing ground for autonomous buses in the United States. Our two, in my mind, and I track this daily, our two biggest competitors are Los Angeles and Atlanta, and I think we're right there. I believe our guideway is better than all three in terms of that. The nice thing, too, about our guideway is that as it terminates in Hartford, as you know, there's a small loop that goes through the city, right? So what it will allow us to do is have a driver sitting behind the wheel of an autonomous bus, hopefully run it fully autonomously down the guideway, which we fully control, and then have the driver take it over as it runs the circle through Hartford, and then let it be autonomous again back on the guideway, all the while sitting there to ensure that if there's any type of an issue, they can immediately take over and run it. Hopefully, as that, and the vehicles that we're pursuing allow for upgrading. So once we achieve these vehicles, we won't need to go out and get a brand new vehicle as the next round of technology improves. We're able to simply improve the technology on the vehicle through each iteration. And obviously, with the way our guideway is set up, we can do this in stages, right? We can start with just autonomous on the guideway, let the driver take over in downtown. The next generation hopefully will allow it to be autonomous while in downtown with the driver sitting behind the wheel, and then take it from stage to stage. But we've brought in most of the major bus manufacturers and allowed them to tour the guideway, and we are aggressively pushing this asset forward as what I've been on most of them. I'm aware of. We are on the national BRT, APTA's National BRT Committee for Standards. We hosted it here a couple months ago, and we participate heavily in that. We are also members of the Autonomous Committee developing the pilot bus program, which Art spoke of earlier. We're members of that as well. So we're heavily engaged in the association that Art represents. I have been for 30 years. I didn't want to say that, and I did. Don't write that down. Tremendous organization. Absolutely tremendous organization. Can't tell you what wonderful partners they are to our business. Can't tell you how far they've moved public transit in the time that I've been here. And since I was a really young guy, I was able to find mentors there that I could avail myself to that helped me throughout my career. So we're blessed to have him here today, and tremendously blessed to have him at the association and the leader of the association, who I happen to be close to as well. So they're outstanding, and they help lead the way. But we have this asset, and we're pushing it forward, making as many partners as we can, and trying to develop this here. And we think we have a winner. We've been in close discussion with Federal Transit Administration. We're very optimistic that we'll be awarded a grant soon, and be able to kick off what will be one of the very first big bus autonomous projects in the United States. We're hoping to be first. We may not be because there was a round right before us, but we will be definitely one of the first. As Art mentioned, there's 80, I didn't know that till you said, there's 80 of these small little shuttle projects going on, but there's technically no large bus autonomous projects in the United States. And we're confident we're going to be one of the first three, if not the first. And two of the things we intend to study on our guideway, which make it so unique, are precision docking and bus platooning. The guideway operates, for those of you who may or may not have been on it, operates like a rail line, right? The bus pulls up, the doors open, and there's a platform that you step out onto. Now, one of the things you have with human drivers is every driver pulls up to that platform differently. Unfortunately, some bounce off of it. Infrequently, but it does happen. Some scrape it. Some pull up 8 inches away where there's now a large step, and a piece of metal has to be put in to ensure that when you step off, you don't slide down between the cracks, right? You don't have that problem on a rail line because there's a physical mechanism holding the vehicle to where it needs to be. But on a bus system, the drivers obviously are controlling that, and everyone does it differently. I truly believe in my heart we have great drivers that do a tremendous job with this, and that's sincere, but it's still not 100% accurate. So we're going to be studying precision docking. We're also studying a concept called bus platooning. And what bus platooning is when you've seen our big 60-foot buses that are basically two buses that are married together, right? What bus platooning is taking two smaller buses, i.e. two 30-foot buses, and running them one directly behind the other. Now, why is that important? Well, because during peak service, those two buses are totally full, right? They can be packed at 7 o'clock in the morning when everybody's going to work, just like cars, right? But at noon, they could be largely empty, just like the roads. And now you have a 60-foot bus tooling around and the cost of operating it, and everybody in the public asking you, why are you operating 19 times a day? Why are you operating such a big bus when there's nobody on it? Well, because it's full between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m., and it's full between 2 a.m. and 4 p.m., 5 p.m., but during off-peak time. We don't have a fleet of small buses to bring the big one in and bring the small one back out. So bus platooning allows one bus through autonomy to track directly behind the other vehicle and come on and off the road as we choose. and it's a major advancement in our business. It's done in trucking. I'm sure you see them on the highway when you're driving down the highway, right? But we have not accomplished it tremendously successful in the bus industry, but autonomous offers that. So this is just kind of a quick window. I know I've way overused my time already, but this is just a quick window on some of the things we're going to be studying on our guideway, our unique, wonderful, tremendous guideway that I inherited. And we're excited to bring to you here in a safe and effective way. Uh-oh. Is that it? All right, lastly, I want to talk to you real quick about our electrification program. As Art mentioned, the entire industry is pushing towards the electrification of bus fleets. Most major cities in many states have adopted electrification policies the legislatures has. Our legislature actually adopted an act that will mandate us as a state to have 30% all-electric fleet by 2030. So we are then obligated to take our facilities and do major overhauls to them to bring the electric in, charging stations, and we're starting to push forward with electrification. We've written, actually Rick has written, a couple of grants to the DEEP, which is our local public utility operation, and successfully been awarded some money through the Volkswagen program. I'm sure you're aware of that. And we have several pilots now underway. We have a pilot recently started in Bridgeport. When are they scheduled, Rick, to get their buses? Okay, this March, they're scheduled to get their first electric vehicles. They're a partner public transit agency similar to an authority that we fund. We've also have that, so that's the first round of electric buses. We're out on the street now for an electric bus bid, and we're going to electrify the Stamford, New Haven, and Windham facilities in the next iteration. So we will be going systematically throughout. And the reason we chose those is there's various reasons. The one in Windham is a partnership with UConn because they're anxious to have electric buses on their campus. The others, we're trying to use the most modern facilities that we have completed to begin electrification. So we're on the cutting edge of electrification, we're on the cutting edge of autonomous, and we're on the cutting edge of microtransit with our partners, the taxi services, Uber services, and trying to push forward with coordination of human service agencies. I think these are the major tracks in the public transit industry. We're trying to cover all of them, hiring some new people to do that. We're very excited to be, I'm very excited to be in our business today after all these years because it is racing forward at a pace we've never had before. Truly exceptionally exciting time to be part of this. Everybody's into it. We get calls regularly. We got great partners here in Connecticut. And because we have some input with all of the resources here, we have a wonderful opportunity here to really take this thing forward and be one of the shining examples in the country. And I think we're on track to do that. So thank you very much.